just talking about it. This is Holly Fleck and Jason Hauk. Welcome to our December episodes. We cannot believe it's the end of 2018. So we're going to be talking about a look back at 2018 and kind of what's happened here with this podcast, and also what the future has in store for Jason and his travels and for the podcast itself. Say hi, Jason.
Hey, good morning. How you doing? Good to be back.
So we want to get started with talking about Jason. He's been very, very busy, traveling quite a bit. So we want to check in with him on where he's been and, more importantly, who he's met with.
Yeah, thanks. I just got back to town since the end of October. I have been wandering the country, meeting a lot of great folks, talking about Islam mostly, but it's taken me to about 15 classrooms or audiences in the last 15 days. So a little jet lag, but glad to catch up now and think about where I've been and what I've been doing.
So you said 15 classrooms and audiences. Can you kind of describe the audience type? Is it college kids? Is it older groups?
Yeah, so this has been a really good session for me. I got to sit down. I was the invited guest speaker at a gathering of physicians of Pakistani descent. Most of them went to the same medical schools in Pakistan, but they're here in America. They've lived here for decades. Some of them, their families are here, very Americanized in their culture, but still proud of their Pakistani heritage. And so they get together throughout the year and talk about medical things, but it's also a kind of a reunion as well. So they brought me in to talk about what I've been talking about. And I was invited by my friend, Dr. Babar, and we went up to Virginia basically together, and he introduced me to his friends and audience, and he asked me to just speak about what I've been talking to non-Muslims about so they could understand what I'm doing. And that turned out to be a wonderful opportunity. Met a lot of his friends, got to answer a lot of questions that they had, but it really gave us some time to think about what do non-Muslims ask about Islam. And that kind of became the big topic, because here were a bunch of Muslims who lived in America for a long time. They're from everywhere on the political spectrum, and I want to tell you about one guy from West Virginia. But they wanted to know, well, what are non-Muslims asking you? Because we know what they ask us as Muslims in America. We get questions all the time, but what would they ask you as kind of an Islamic studies professor? What do you explain to them? What do they want to know from you about our religion? What are the honest questions that they wouldn't ask us in polite company?
And so what are some of those?
That was kind of the fun part. How do you relay a very honest question from a non-Muslim to a group of Muslims in an audience?
Right. That's a challenge.
Are very kind to have invited you to come speak at their event,
right,
and talk about that. So, some of them are very simple but very raw. Well, why are they all killing each other? And that's a lot to break down. Okay, who are they? What do you mean? Why are they all? I mean, if every Muslim in the world was killing one another, this world would be a fire. There would be. That's 1.7 billion people. So clearly, they're not all killing each other. And who are the they? That's one of the things I always try to bring out in my audiences. Well, who do you think is mad at each other or killing each other, and who are they trying to kill? I get the old standby. What's with the 72 virgins in heaven? Which you probably wouldn't ask in polite conversation. But I talk to them about what it actually says about heaven in the Quran, what isn't in there, and how this myth came about, that there are somehow 72 virgins waiting in heaven for people. So a lot of it was just along those lines. But then we talked about just the basic questions. Well, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? And what's the difference between, what's a Sufi? What is a Salafist? Or what does this mean? What is Sharia law? The very basic questions. I hear it all the time in the news. I read about it in articles, and I just don't know what it is. They don't have the background. So it was a really fun conversation, spread out, during lunches, during dinners, during my official speaking time, but just sitting in the lobby in the hotel and chatting with people. It was really, really useful for me, and I hope useful for them.
When you go to speak, say, to Sand Hills Community College and your students there versus a meeting of Pakistani physicians, do you have a different lecture or approach that you take?
I think most of the messages are the same, but I can cut out a lot of the background information. If I'm talking to Pakistani physicians who are 99% Muslim and have grown up in Muslim homes and Muslim cultures at home, in their home country and now their new country, they get all the background. They don't need to. But sometimes I do need to talk about background that even they don't talk about at home, because maybe most of them all grew up in a Sunni home and they don't know much about Shia Islam, or vice versa, or they don't really understand groups like ISIS because they're doctors. They don't deal with terrorism every day like I did in the military, looking at counterterrorism models and seeing that. Like they want to get into that nuanced conversation and background about how do these ideas form that terrorists use. So some of it is there, but there is the difference. I can skip over topics that of course they know. So I might use the same slides, but I could say, look, you guys know this slide, but I want them to understand what I tell non-Muslims. So I'm very transparent. Like I don't go into a non-Muslim audience and fill their head full of myths. These are the things I explain, which are just facts, and they're questions that people ask.
So by now, you're used to being the middleman between non-Muslims and Muslims in our country. It seems like that's continuing to happen. Each group is asking you how to communicate with one another rather than actually having the conversations with each other. So they're using you to try to bridge this gap. So hopefully one day they can start having conversations of their own together.
Funny you brought that up, and we didn't plan that segue. But one of the interesting things that happened at this meeting with these Pakistani physicians was not with any of the people I went to go see. My friend Dr. Babar had arranged a lunch. Somehow he knew the president of the Islamic Society of North America, which is the largest Islamic organization in this hemisphere. I think they helped create over 600 mosques in America. And he has been with the organization for 40-something, 50 years. He's originally from the Kashmir area between India and Pakistan, but he has lived in America. And all of a sudden, Dr. Babar says, Jason, do you have lunch plans? Because I'd like you to have lunch with the president of ISNA, which is the Islamic Society of North America. I'm like, the president of it? Yes, yeah, he's here, and his wife is here, and I'd love for us to just have a quiet lunch and talk for a little while you're here. What a great opportunity. He's here, you're here. I said, sure, let's do this. So right after afternoon prayer, Dr. Babar comes out and says, hey, let me introduce Dr. Syed. Let me get the words straight there. And he says, and this is his wife. And we start chatting, and the four of us just walk out of the hotel, take a 7-minute walk over to a nearby Persian restaurant to have some amazing food. And we just start chatting along the way. And Dr. Syed looks at me and he goes, so what's your background? Tell me your bio. Dr. Babar has told me a little bit about you. Why are you doing this? How did this happen? And so I lead off with, I grew up in a Baptist church in America, and I went to the Middle East for the first time in 1996, and I learned about Muslims and Muslim culture, and I just started studying it. And when I retired, I found out there was a need. People had questions still unanswered, and there was a need for it, so I started speaking. And he stops me and he goes, Jason, God has chosen you for this mission because you grew up Baptist. And we talked more about that at lunch. I'm like, what is he talking about? He says, you're one of the few people that can probably talk about this because of your background in the Army and what you've been taught, what you've seen, and your background in religion, and the fact that you're not a Muslim. You can talk about this, and people will listen to you. They'll at least have the conversation. He said, I've been in America for 50, 60 years. I talk to audiences all the time. People will believe all kinds of horrible things about me and what I'm trying to do. And here you are. They will at least give you the benefit of the doubt. And that's an advantage that no Muslim has when they walk into an audience. So somehow, and we had a long lunch, and his wife and I walked back from the meal, and we chatted real quietly, and it was a very personal. This 30-minute break for lunch turned into almost 2.5 hours, and we sat in this restaurant with everybody in there staring at us as we're clearly having a discussion about Islam in the middle of this restaurant, mostly full of Muslims who are having a halal lunch. And we're just chatting away. It was so stunning, so surreal. Like I would never imagine that's what I would be also doing at lunch, was sitting down with this gentleman. But him and his wife were both so excited to meet me, and asked for a copy of my Quran interpretation and wanted to keep in touch and see if I would come speak at their annual meeting that they're going to have in Chicago next year. And it just blossomed into this great discussion.
So I know that people learn a lot from you when they come to hear you speak, but what did you learn from him from that lunch? What did some things you took away from him?
The first thing was his idea that somehow, because I was raised Baptist, I'm well equipped to have this discussion about Islam. Like, where is he going here? So he said, look, your religion and my religion we look inwards. He said, I'll guarantee in your Baptist church, you assume that if someone wasn't on the pews next to you, they were probably going to hell. They were on the wrong path. He said, look, it's the same for Islam. In many mosques, you will hear people make this assumption that we are talking about the only path to God and everybody else in the world's going to hell if they don't join us. And he said, you get that. You grew up in that. And he was absolutely right. I mean, I remember I've been to many Baptist churches across the country and hearing that, even if they don't say it out loud, which some of them do, but the insinuation that only us chosen few in this church understand how to really get to heaven. Everybody else is going to hell if we can't get them into our pews to hear our exact message. And I come from a long line of preachers who did this every summer up in New England, so I'm familiar with the script of things you say, and he's absolutely right. And I thought about my visits to mosques and discussions about Islam with Muslims, and there is that just initial starting belief that we have the chosen path. And they literally use that word a lot. This is the path, or the straight path, and everybody else is making their way to hell. How do we get them to the straight path? And I grew up with that. That was very much the way my church thought about things as well. So that was kind of point number one on Baptists. The second thing we ended up stumbling into in the lunch conversation was the importance of secularism in a society. That if you let a religion get too closely tied to a government, if you create a state religion, bad things will happen. That is, and both of these folks, coming from the Pakistan, India area, have seen this time. Some poor girl right now is running for her life to get out of Pakistan, so she's not beheaded by the mobs for being a Christian and supposedly saying something about Islam. And so we're having that discussion, and he said, if it weren't for the Baptists, America might have a state religion. We non-Christians really owe the Baptist Church a big thank you for letting freedom of religion be the law of the land instead of having a state religion. And I thought, how am I a Baptist and I don't know what he's talking about? I really was like, have you ever heard that concept? I hadn't either. I'm literally just sitting there for 2.5 hours, turning around in my head.
Like, do I fake it? Do I act like it? No, like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Baptist.
Way to go, Baptist.
I was literally like, you've got to explain this to. So now, here I am, a Baptist that wanders around America, telling people what Muslims generally believe. And here I am with an Islamic scholar, turnabout is fair play, and he's explaining to me the role that Baptists had in the early founding of America's freedoms of religion. And I was just laughing. I'm like, this is too ironic.
Right.
Thank you. I mean, if I hadn't had this lunch, I would have never even thought about this, because I spend most of my time looking at someone else's religion.
Right.
And he's educating me. And then I went and looked up, afterwards, went to the Google and said, tell me the truth. And sure enough, though, document after document explains how some of the early Baptist leaders in America were really pushing all the other religious leaders and pushing people in the founding movement of America to not have a state religion, because freedom of religion was important and secularism was important, and we didn't want to end up in the same boat for the reasons that people left Britain to start with and left Europe, was to get away from religious persecution. And I just didn't know that was a movement of the Baptist Church, which I'm pretty excited about now. Maybe there's a reason I come from this long line of Baptist preachers that talks about religion.
And like you said, how ironic that another man following a different religion told you something new about your religion. And that just goes to show, like, we can all learn something from each other. And it doesn't matter what you're necessarily believing in.
Absolutely. It was really, really an interesting lunch. We talked a lot about the importance of secularism, though, and freedom of religion. And he really kind of stressed that, too. He said, look, I'm a Muslim living in America that helps people build mosques in their community, but I don't want a state religion. I am living here, and most Muslims that live in America are happy to live in America because it's the place you can be yourself religiously. No one's going to come down and tell you how to live your religious life in America. And Dr. Barber agreed. He said, most Muslims will tell you, I feel better about being a Muslim in America than I do in my own home country, which is a Muslim majority, because we really have freedom of religion here. The church, the state doesn't interfere with the message in the mosque. it is truly a free chance to worship. And as I spoke with other Pakistani doctors at this conference, I heard that message again and again. This is the best place in the world to be a Muslim. As much as you hear some people complain about America's misunderstanding of Islam and some of the things that are said during political campaigns and said by extremists in America that don't like Muslims, this is the best place to live if you're Muslim, because we truly do believe in individual liberties and freedom of religion and not a freedom from religion. You can have religion in America, and no one will try to interfere with it.
That's all for episode number 15, but stay tuned. We continue the conversation of politics and religion. Jason shares a story with us about a man he spoke with from West Virginia about religious intolerance. And we talk about how to use religion as a diplomatic tool. Plus, we discuss some of the toughest questions Jason gets asked during his lectures and how he answers them. As always, thanks for listening.